everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Katie, and today I am doing my favorite books in every single genre. All right, so I have every single genre listed. I hope, because honestly, there are quite a few genres out there. There's subgenres. We're just going to go through literally like everything that is in Christian fiction because this is a Christian fiction video. So it's going to be clean reads and everything. I think everything I have for you is technically labeled as Christian fiction. If it's not, though, it is going to be clean fiction. So let's get started. So I'm going to go first with middle grade and YA, only because that one's kind of has its own, category and stuff. So I just kind of lump them all together. So for middle grade, one of my absolute favorite Christian fiction middle grade series is Young Wit by Phil Lawler and Dave Arnold. It is one of my absolute favorite series of all time. I absolutely love it. And I've read all of the books that are out so far. There are actually plans for more books, which I'm very excited about because there were a few little loose ends at the end of the last book that I read. So I was like, well, hopefully there is some going on. So I'll let you know how many are out right now. I think it's like 5, are out so far. And yes, it's 5. I actually got in contact with Phil Lawler, which I was like, Phil Lawler wrote back to me like, I've been a fan of yours for like ever since I was like 8 years old, or maybe even 6. So yeah. But yes, so there are 5 out right now, and there's plans for more, which I'm so excited about. And this is just a fun series. It's a great series because if you love Adventures in Odyssey, which I still do after 30 years of listening almost, but I love Adventures in Odyssey. And this series is about Whitaker, John Avery Whitaker, or Mr. Wit, as a lot of people call him, or just Wit. It's about his life growing up, how he became a Christian, about his inventions, all of the mysteries he explored and stuff. And I just really loved that aspect of it. But it also has a great deal of heart and also tough topics too to talk about. So these are great to talk about with your kids and stuff. And I just really, really loved how both the authors really went into these books with the expectation of like, it being towards younger readers, but still having a lot more heart and a lot more, faith-based stories mixed into it. Absolutely love it. Highly recommend those. All right, as far as YA goes, I think I'm going to go with this one. So Offsides by Laurie Z. Scott is the book I'm going to go for YA. I don't read a lot of YA, especially Christian fiction YA. So this one was a pretty easy mark for me. So this one, honestly, I was hesitant to go into it because I'm not a huge sports girly. I'm really, really not. I don't watch sports on TV. I don't go to sports games. I don't mind going to a sports game. I actually do enjoy it sometimes. But this one is about a girl in soccer during high school. And so it's kind of pretty much like a day-to-day life on a high school student, but also deals with tough topics of trafficking. So be aware going into this. But I just felt like the author did a fantastic job with it. It is more of a hard-hitting book, but it kept me reading. I feel like it's a little slower paced in the beginning because we're just kind of learning about the high school life, about soccer and everything. But by the end of the book, I was like, deeply emotional and deeply invested in the storyline, and I really enjoyed it. So if you're looking for a YA book to enjoy, this one's definitely it. And it also definitely will bring up some topics around the table as well. So there is also, I believe, which I loved at the end of the book, there are resources for people who are, who may be in that situation in trafficking, and you can find those signs more easily through your school. So really appreciate that little tool at the end of the book as well. Now we're going to go into mysteries/thrillers. This is separate from like romantic suspense. These could be categorized as the same thing, but I feel like these are more intense than your regular romantic suspense. So I have 2 in this category for mystery/thrillers. I would also put a couple of Ted Deckers on. I don't own his books, and it's been a while since I've read one of his. But I definitely think like Saint and Sinner and 3 used to be like in my tops of like the thriller aspect of Christian fiction. But the 2 that I have on my shelves right now, the first one is The Vanishing at Castle Moreau by Jamie Jo Wright. I love this one. This is my favorite of her books. Really, really enjoyed this one. It has that Gothic Victorian feel. It's a mixture of like, I felt like Phantom of the Opera, a little bit of Frankenstein. It was just a really great time. I really enjoyed it. It kept me guessing throughout the entire story. Really loved it. I definitely would love to reread this one. I think it's going to be a great time rereading it, but I really enjoyed this one. So there's that one. And then the other one that I have is more of, I guess both of these are kind of thriller type. So this one is State of Lies by Siri Mitchell. And she's only written two, like thriller-esque. She's more of a romance author. She needs to write more suspense books, because let me tell you, this one was top tier fantastic. Like, I would watch this in a movie and I would not be disappointed. Absolutely not at all. So this one is about a woman who, her husband dies in a car crash, and he was on his way to go get an item to fix a sink. And then a couple, I don't even think it's that far after that, she realizes that things aren't starting to add up about his accident. She's trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening, and it's very high intense. It is a political thriller, but I feel like the political part is like, you know, a sideline part. But I just really love this. And I love the high intense action, the mystery. It had me guessing to the end what was going on. And I really, really love this book so much. And the cover just screams intense suspense, right? So really, really love this one. Those are my not romantic suspense, mysteries and thriller recommendations. All right, now I'm going to go into cozy mystery recommendation. The only one that I've read that's Christian fiction, because I haven't gotten into cozy mysteries that much yet. The only one that I have really enjoyed so far is the Gone to the Dogs mystery series. They're by Kathleen Erbarbo and Janice Thompson, I believe. Yeah, Janice Thompson. And I just really love this series. I've read book 1 and 2 so far, and I plan on finishing out the series next year, hopefully. It's been a 6-book series. I don't know if it's going to be any more than that, but it's all set, I believe, in Texas around, you know, a dog kennel and the family surrounding the dog kennel. And it's just been really sweet. I don't know if there's been murder. I can't remember if there's a murder in the books or not, but it's been very lighthearted mystery. There is, you know, a couple heavy topics here and there, but for the most part, it's just a very enjoyable, cozy mystery series that I really enjoyed. And still enjoy, because I haven't finished it yet. All right, we'll go into romantic suspense next, since we got into like the thrillers and mysteries and cozy mysteries. Let's go into romantic suspense now. So I have read a lot of romantic suspense in the past, so I have a few options that are my favorites. The first, which I don't have copies of yet, hopefully soon. Actually, I just purchased the first book for myself, so that'll be coming soon, hopefully. And that is the Rock Harbor series by Colleen Coble. It was my first series by Colleen Coble I ever read, and still remains to this day my favorite of hers. I've read a good half of her series, maybe a little bit more than that, and this has always been my favorite series. It's, I believe, 5 or 6 book series, and it just follows Bree and her dog, and of course there's other characters as well throughout the series, but her and her dog are a rescue team, so they go out in search of missing people in the mountains and stuff. And I just really loved it. I love Bree. I still remember her name, and I very rarely remember a character's name unless I like absolutely adored it, or like if it's on the cover title or something. But I really love this one. Very, very good romance, very good suspense. Love the whole entire series. I think only one I might have given like 3 or 3.5 stars to, but the rest of the series was like 4 and 5 stars. So really enjoyed that series. Then I have 2 books by Melissa Coslin, and she's one of my absolute favorite authors. So I have Dangerous Beauty, which is about a woman who is like in danger of being trafficked across the border, and she comes into the U.S. and she is on the run, and she runs into this man who, unbeknownst to her, is trying to help her. So he ends up having an arranged marriage because he can't actually give any more visas or passports to anyone who he has helped. So he ends up pre-arranging a marriage with her in name only. So there is romance. It's a slow burn romance. We have a tortured hero as well. And I just really loved the story. I mean, I loved it. I know a couple of my friends have really enjoyed this book as well, and I just really enjoyed it. It was very suspenseful. Romance was good. I love it. And then the other book I have by Melissa Coslin is her newest release, which is The Lost Library. And this is actually I wouldn't say it's a magical realism book. No, I don't think so. But it's about a woman who's on the run. Again, another woman on the run from something different, though. And she ends up working at this office with this boss man who they call the Beast. So it is another tortured soul hero. He has scars and they call him the Beast because he's kind of gruff. And he finds out that she's in danger, and so he's there to protect her. He wants to protect her because of things in his past as well. And I just really loved the action and the intensity. And, there's a couple mysteries going on, as well as a lost missing library that has a lot of historical artifacts in it. So really enjoyed this one as well. It's really good. And the last one I have is actually perfect for this time of year. It's a Christmas one. And I could not love a Christmas book more. I think this is actually my favorite Christmas book ever. And that's saying something because I do read quite a few around Christmas time. But Better Watch Out by Natalie Walters. This is my absolute favorite Christmas book. It is just filled with action, with romance. And this is like the most immersive book description I've ever heard. And you can tell the author has been to New York during Christmas time because the descriptions are just spot on. No, I've never been to New York City, but I do live in New York. So I know the weather, I know the cold, I know the fall or winter season. But this one just hit the right spot. It has a bodyguard, which I love. I love a good bodyguard romance. And it was just a great, fun ride. And yes, I highly recommend that one if you're looking for a intense / romance type of Christmas book. A little bit different than your regular Christmas story. All right, now let's see. We are going into the contemporary side of things. We're going to go to historical next, but we're still in contemporary land here. So I'm going to go ahead and do some contemporary / literary fiction. So these are ones that have very little to no romance in them and more of maybe a hard-hitting story as well. So let's go ahead and see what we have. So I took a little look-see around my bookshelves and stuff, and I have 4 for this. And I tried to find the ones that had little to no romance in it. One has a little bit more romance, but I would say it's very, 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 very subplot. And then the rest have no romance at all, really. So that's good. So the first one is Everything is Just Beginning by Erin Bartels. This was a very surprising favorite of mine when I read it for the first time. I was like, it was so surprising. I was like, I could not believe how much I love this story. And in this one, we're following a guitarist who has been kicked out of his band, and he moves in with his uncle. Well, his uncle lives on the back lot of this very wealthy, well-to-do family who are huge in the music business. And so he sneaks into the party because he got his uncle's invitation because his uncle's away on a trip or something. And he decides to crash the party with the invitation. And he ends up running into the daughter of this wealthy couple, and they form a bond and a friendship through music. And I just really, really loved this. I loved the contemporary feel of it. It definitely has to do a lot with the 80s music, I believe, is honestly the main era of music they talk about is the 80s. But I just really love this one. I loved Erin Bartel's storytelling in this, and I've only read 2 of her books, but so far this is my absolute favorite of hers. Next was my favorite book of, well, actually, I think it was the first year I started BookTube, probably. I think so. Maybe the second year. But that is The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp by Sarah Brunsvold. I loved this one so much. This is a contemporary story about a woman who is pretty much almost about to lose her job in the newspaper business. And so they say, we're going to give you a last-ditch attempt at being a reporter. So she's given the hassle of writing a obituary for an older woman who's in hospice. And so at first I was very hesitant in going into this book. I was like, I do not like stories about, characters, in hospice and stuff. I really struggle with those. But this was totally different. This is one of the best books you can possibly read. I loved the character of Mrs. Kipp. I felt such a kinship. And I felt both her, Mrs. Kipp, and Aiden were kind of a mixture of me personally as characters. And I just really, really loved both of them. And Mrs. Kipp's story, her humor, her outlook on life and on God, it was fantastic. Still one of my favorites, and still one of my favorite covers too. I don't know, I just love the bright blue color and the little newspaper article clipping. I did forget to put in this contemporary women's fiction into it, and that is With Every Memory by Janine Roche. I love this book so much. It's about a woman who was in a train accident, and she loses one of her children, and she also loses a lot of years of her memory. And so she has no idea what's been going on the past, for 13 years, I think, or something, or 8 years. And so she has to reevaluate her life, reevaluate her family, and where she lives even. And it's just a very heartbreaking story. There was a lot of things going on, and I just felt like this was such a unique story. Like, I never read anything like this before, and I really, really love this one. This is Where It Ends by Cindy K. Sproul's. This was the first book I've ever read by her, and certainly not the last. I own all of her books now. I just love her writing. Her stories are definitely more character driven, but oh my goodness, her characters are literally one of the best I've ever read in my entire life. And I read over 200 books a year now, so take my word for it when she has amazing characters. So this one is the only like contemporary storyline. It does bounce back every once in a while to like, I think I saw like an 1800s line somewhere or something, but it is mostly contemporary. So in this one, we're following a woman who she got married at a very young age, and her husband took her to the mountains to pretty much live in the backwoods and not really honestly having any contact with anyone. And so years and years later, he passes away, and he tells her when he's dying, he's like, don't tell anyone what's in the box. And she's like, I don't even know what's in the box. And so she spends her entire life, not telling anybody what's in the box and not opening it for herself. And so this guy comes all of a sudden one day, a younger guy, and he's a reporter. And he's like, I heard tale and stories that your husband might have been involved with some kind of scandal back in the day where some money was stolen from somebody or some treasure was found. And so she's like, I want nothing to do with you reporters. Get away from me. Stay away from my property. But what follows is the man ends up staying on and helping this woman and becoming such a found family through both of them. I just love their characters. I absolutely adored Minerva. Minerva was truly such a strong character, and her humor and just, the quite essential, I don't want to say old biddy, but she kind of starts out that way, but then you find out, her inner beauty and her love, and I love the two of the characters together. Just love them so much. Still remember this book, so I want to do a reread on that. Then my last one is a very heart-wrenching book, but I absolutely love it, and that is Unspoken by Angela Hunt. This is absolutely the most heartbreaking book I've ever read. Yeah, I can hide my emotions when I read pretty well. Like, I don't cry in front of anybody when I read. If I cry, I'm usually by myself when I cry about a book. But this one, I think I was reading it in the kitchen or something, and I was finished reading it. I went to the living room, and I was still crying. And my mom was like, what's wrong? What's going on? What's happening? Like, 'cause I don't cry. I really don't. I mean, I really don't cry that often. And so when she saw I was crying, I'm like, this book was so sad. Like, it ripped out my heart. Like, I love this. I love this book, but it also like tore my heart out. And yes, if you're sensitive to animals being hurt, I highly recommend either skipping this or being very cautious going into it. But it is one of my absolute favorite books. I love this book, and I think it tore my heart out so much because I love gorillas, and gorillas are like one of my absolute favorite creatures ever that God created. And I have a little bit of a bond with the gorilla at our nearby zoo because I used to intern there, and not with the gorillas, but I used to pass by, and he knew who I was. Every single time he would notice me in a crowd or whatever. And so just seeing the story with the gorilla, and it was so good. So this one, we're following Glee, and Glee has been taking care of this female gorilla for a very, very long time. And she has been teaching her sign language and stuff. Well, the zoo wants her back because, hey, they need the popularity of the gorilla now that she learned sign language. So it's her fight to make sure that either the gorilla stays with her or she ends up working at the zoo to protect the gorilla. And so it is such a heartbreaking story, but I do absolutely love the gorilla. Probably more than the female character, if I'm being honest. All right, on to, let's see, what are we on? Contemporary romances. So we're going to go to contemporary romances and rom-coms. So the first one I want to talk about, I don't have a physical copy. That's why I'm going to talk about it now before I forget. And that one is not out yet, actually. It's coming out next spring, I believe. Next spring or next summer. And that is Some Like It Scott by Paperbacks. Highly recommend pre-ordering it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's funny. It's humorous. It's about a woman who is a very klutzy, accident-prone, but also very, very punny, love of puns. She loves puns, and just her humor, her outlook on life, and I just love her. So she's a travel blogger, writer, traveling to Scotland to do a story on this manor that does these historical time period experiences. And so she went there, and she ends up meeting the hero in a very, very humorous way. And I just really loved both their characters. I love the story. It was just a really good vacation read. I loved it. So highly recommend. If you're going on a vacation and you want something lighthearted and great, pick up that one. It's going to be great. Since we started off with rom-com, I'm going to continue with that rom-com feel. And we're going to go with Dear Henry, Love Edith by Becca Kinzer. This one was just such a fun ride. If you like small towns with all the the quirky, hilarious characters in the background, it's got that trope of like mistaken identities and writing letters back and forth, which I love. So we're following a girl who's headed to the missions field, but she needs to make some kind of short stop in a town, and she has no place to stay. So this lady goes, hey, my uncle, he broke his hip recently, or his leg or something, and he's got the upstairs apartment free, so he's not going to be up there. And so she's like, okay, I'll go up there. So they both kind of think that the other one, because her name is Edith is kind of like a vintage style name, and so they both think the other one is an elderly person, and so they write back and forth to each other through letters, and I just really enjoyed it. And yes, I know that a few people have read this. They don't like once the character finds out that the other one is younger, they don't tell each other, but it doesn't last super long time because they both kind of find out almost at the same time that the other one is a younger person. So, but I really enjoyed it, and it is a little bit more slapstick humor, but I do love slapstick humor. It's always a good time. And yeah, it was fun. And the nod to Abbott and Costello a little bit later on in the book too is fun. Then we have these, which I would consider these are like a mix of like just regular contemporary romance and rom-coms, but we have the Skimar series by Pepper Basham. Whoops, these are out of order. There we go. 1, 2, 3. So these are the Skimar series by Pepper Basham. I love these, and if you pick up Some Like It Scott, you'll see a nod to the series. But I just love the series so much. We have Authentically Izzy, Positively Penelope, and Loyally Luke, and each one is about one of the siblings or family members of these characters, and I love these so much. Authentically Izzy is about, of course, Izzy, and it has very much a lot of fandom from Lord of the Rings. So, but don't let that stop you if you're not a fan of Lord of the Rings or whatever, because the storyline is super cute. These are all told a lot through letters and through text messages and emails, and it's just a great time. So that one's about Izzy. This one is about Penelope, which is probably my favorite in the series, if I'm being honest. I thought Loyally Luke was. Still Luke is my favorite character, but I think Positively Penelope is my favorite book. This one has a lot of nods to Broadway and to musicals, and it's just, this one is probably the most humorous of the series, I feel like, and Penelope is just like the type of character I would want to be friends with, 100%. And then we have Loyally Luke, who is of course about Luke, and he's my favorite of the family members. I just think he's so funny and so sweet, and I would love another story with him in it, because he's great. I love him. Then the last rom-com I have is Love Overboard by Shannon Sue Dunlap. I honestly wish that I would have waited for like a vacation time to read this, only because like this is like the perfect quintessential vacation read I've ever felt. Or if you're in the wintertime and you just want a getaway book, this is absolutely perfect. This is a little bit of a mystery, but mostly just rom-com, hilarious fun. And it's going to be a series, which I'm so excited about. And I love Love Overboard. But this one's hilarious. It's a mixture of The Love Boat / The Golden Girls. And I just loved it. We have older protagonists who, I think there's 4 of them, so that's kind of why they reminded me of the Golden Girls. And they're all up in everybody's business on the boat. They take cruises. That's pretty much like their retirement plan, is just to take these cruises. And so they're matchmakers. And I just loved them so much. And them trying to find a match for the cruise director, it was just hilarious. It was so much fun, and highly recommend. As I said, if you love The Love Boat or Golden Girls, you will love this book. And I'm so excited it's going to be a series. All right, then the last one is definitely contemporary romance and not rom-com. And the last one is In Search of a Prince by Tony Shiloh. This is a duology, but this is my favorite in the duology, although both are good. Both are good. But I love this one so much. It's a Princess Diaries retelling, and it's about a girl who finds out that she is an heir to an African island country, and she finds out that her grandfather is passing away, and so she's like, I had no idea that I was royalty. What's going on? So she decides to visit the island, and she finds out, what it takes to be a princess. And this one is definitely geared more toward, I would say, the political aspects of being a princess versus like the romance, because in order to become queen, she needs to find a prince, and so she has to be on the search for a prince and date all these different men, trying to find someone who would hopefully fit before she becomes queen. And I just loved it. Honestly, Brielle is one of my favorite characters of all time. The faith content in this book is probably one of my favorites. Most of the books I've talked about are very, very, very light on faith, if not don't have, honestly, a lot of faith in each one. But this one, the faith content in this is just beautifully woven in. I felt like Brielle just had such a strong faith, and it was part of her life. It didn't feel like it was a side part in the story, or if it was just thrown in. No, it felt like her faith was part of her life, and I just love that. So highly recommend. All right, the video is getting long, so let's go move on from rom-coms and contemporary. We're going to go into historical fictions. So I'm going to do a couple different ones, actually, because there are quite a few subgenres in historical fiction. So I'm going to actually do biblical fiction first, just to make sure I don't forget that. I actually did forget it almost, and it wasn't on my list. So I was like, we better remedy that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple of my favorites on the shelves. This is probably one of my favorite genres, because I got quite a few recommendations, and I actually have two more that I have to go grab, but these are the ones that I'm going to talk about. The first one is, I'm going to do that one last because I have a couple more I have to grab from her. But I have two Rahab retellings, and both are set during biblical times. The first one is The Crimson Cord by Jill Eileen Smith. This is still my favorite of her books. Actually, is my favorite book of hers. And I loved it. It got me so more intrigued by Rahab's character, and just wanting me to dive in more into Rahab's story in the Bible. And that's what I love about biblical fiction. A lot of people don't really enjoy biblical fiction because they feel like it's retelling too much, but you really don't know a lot in the Bible. And I feel like authors who write biblical fiction, they just want you to get more invested in God's word. They want you to be encouraged to dive deeper into God's word, to look at these characters in another light. And I really enjoy biblical fiction. It's one of my favorites. So this one's really, really good. And this is actually the first time I had no idea that Rahab was in the lineage of Jesus until I read this book. And I was like, oh. And so I went back to research, which is a great tool. If you find something out, go back into the Bible and see if it's there. It's there. So absolutely loved it and highly recommend. I really love this one. And then the other retelling, or not retelling, but biblical fiction on Rahab that I love is The Pearl in the Sand by Tessa Afshar. And this was actually a buddy read on my channel. So I have a bunch of tabs in here and a bunch of notes. I didn't really highlight too much, but there was a lot of note taking that I did throughout this. And there was a lot of scenes in here that I just loved. And again, it's pretty much the same, just a biblical fiction story on Rahab. But there was one scene in here, and it's about the pearl in the sand. That's where the title comes from. That just really, really drew me in. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is like the best thing that's ever been written. And I think I wrote a little note on it somewhere about that one scene. I can't remember which one it is. Oh yeah, that one. So I did, put a little note that says, page 352. I think I actually did highlight a lot on that one story a little bit. Oh yeah, I highlighted the whole section because just that pearl in the sand and the analogy they did on how Tessa Afshar used the pearl earring in the sand, and how, or not earring, it's an earring or a pendant, but how she used that analogy on God's love for us and imperfections. And I found that scene so profound and so great. I highlighted the entire section of that one. All right, then I have a series. So if you aren't a fan of biblical fiction characters and stories, but you still want the biblical era, the Emissary series by Angela Hunt. Now, the woman from Lydia, she will bring in very, very, very minor characters in the Bible. Like this one is about the woman who, she's just known as the Lydian woman, and she makes purple dyed cloth. And so she's mentioned like in one line of the Bible. So that's her story. And then we have the Sisters of Corinth, which I don't believe either one of these are mentioned in the Bible, I don't think. But I would say if you're a huge fan of the Mark of the Lion series by Francine Rivers, pick up this Emissary series by Angela Hunt, The Woman from Lydia and the Sisters of Corinth, because it definitely has similar themes. But I will say I feel like these are cleaner than the Mark of the Lion. Not that they're not clean, but some can be a little bit intense in the romance sections. So I feel like these are a better option, just a little bit. And I love this series, and I honestly think I do love these so much. And this is my favorite series of Angela Hunt's, I believe, that I have read so far. Highly recommend. They're both really, really good. And there's a third one coming out next year. I can't wait. Then we're going into my favorite biblical fiction author, who is Misu Andrews. We're actually going to have her later on my channel here on November 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure to stop in during that time for the live chat on the Buddy Read Brave. And that might be on the list too. I don't know. I have not read it yet. I just read the first few pages, I think, but I had to read a couple other books first. So I will be starting that book next week. But Love Amid the Ashes by Misu Andrews. This is my favorite and my first ever book I ever read by her. And yeah, I am positive that this is her first book she ever wrote as far as biblical fiction goes. And let me tell you, what a debut in the biblical fiction world. It was fantastic. This is by far my favorite of hers. I have another series I'm going to talk about too, but I absolutely love this one. So this is a biblical fiction story on the book of Job, and it is so heartbreaking, and her descriptiveness of what happens to Job after everything that happens to him, and it's just so powerful, and it just, made me have a different outlook on Job, because Job was like one of my least favorite books of the Bible, I have to admit. It was hard to get through, but seeing it through a fictional point of view kind of really made me understand a little bit. It was more fleshed out on how he might have felt and stuff, and I just, it made me appreciate the book of Job even more after reading this. This duology, it's a Joseph biblical fiction series by Misu Andrews. We have Potiphar's Wife, which is actually the story of Potiphar's wife, the woman who, pretty much says, hey, she screamed, tore her own dress, saying Joseph hurt her. And so this is all about her story, how she became to be Potiphar's wife. And I just really enjoyed it. It was really, really good. But it's very emotional story. And I like the spin that she took on Potiphar's wife. Yeah, Potiphar's wife. So then the second book, which is probably tied with the Job story, and that is In Feast or Famine. And this is all about Joseph's life after Potiphar and how he became second in command, and all about the feast and the famine. And this was just really, really great story. I really loved this one. I thought it was so good, the story, and yeah, I highly, highly loved it so much. And this is probably my favorite signed book, because she wrote a story. Basically a whole page to me. And I adore Misu Andrews so much. She is absolutely a delight to know and talk to. So really, really love this one as well. And yeah, can't highly recommend it. And it also has one of my favorite villains in a story too. Next we have the historical side. So I'm going to go ahead and do I would say more on the contemporary side of historical fiction. So I'm going to do World War II, as well as more of hard-hitting stories, I guess, in World War II. And then we'll go to historical rom-coms and historical romances. So first up, we're going to do wartime era and non-wartime era historical fiction. I am going to go ahead and do 2 World War II books. I think these are probably at the top, even though I've read a lot of World War II fiction, but I think these 2 are at the top. So we have Until Leaves Fall in Paris by Sarah Sundin. She is one of my absolute favorite authors of World War II fiction, probably my favorite. But this one is about a ballerina who turns into a bookshop owner. She buys a bookshop from this Jewish couple so they can go to America before World War II starts. And she ends up falling in love with a man who owns a like car production company. And he is tasked though to help Germany to build tanks. And so it's a very interesting story on how people you know, on their perspective of him and his child and stuff. And it's just a really great story, very emotional read, but also really good. And there's a very sweet romance as well in it. And the other World War II book that I absolutely adore, that is The Warsaw Sisters by Amanda Barrett. One of my absolute favorite books of all time. This is about two sisters who they lose their father during the war, and they get into some kind of fight, and they end up splitting up, and they end up going into like two different parts of the city, and both end up though in their own way helping out with the resistance throughout the story. And I just really loved the story. I loved the characters, and it's very heartbreaking. I cried a lot in this book, but it's just so good, and I really love this book. Next, we're going into a couple that are just historical fiction. There might be a little bit of romance, but it's more of a subplot. So the first one is In a Far Off Land by Stephanie Lanzam. This is set in the 1920s, which is one of my absolute favorite eras of history. And this is about a woman who she really wants to be in Hollywood. So she runs away to Hollywood, and she ends up being in this big Hollywood party or something. She finds herself there. Well, she ends up waking up in somebody's bed with a dead body in the room. So yeah, there's that. And she has no idea how she got there. She's trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening. I have no idea. And so she's basically told, you're the one who did it. And she's like, I have no memory of this. I know I wouldn't do this. I don't even know him. And so she's trying to figure it out along with this man who also, like, he can kind of tell that she's telling the truth. So he tries to help her out as well. And there is a very slight romance, but I wouldn't say it's very light. And it's more about her journey and the Hollywood scene. I just really enjoyed it. I have to read her other books set in the 1920s. Then the next one I have is another Cindy K. Sproul's book. So this is Coal Black Lies. And this one's set in I believe the late 1800s. Yes, 1899. And this book is a very, I will say, go into it very carefully, because in the beginning, there is talk of attempted suicide. Nothing happens of it, but I just wanted to let you know it's right on the first page. So just as a heads up for you. But I just really loved, as I said, Cindy's characters are top notch and amazing. And in this story, following a man who he's pretty much devastated. So is his wife, because their daughter was killed when she was little. And so they both live pretty much separately as far as their feelings go and everything. But then all of a sudden he sees what he thinks is a ghost, but a little girl just in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere, near their home. And he's like, what is a little girl doing here? Who is she? What's going on? So he decides to take her into their home to try to figure out where she belongs. And she has some form of, not autism, I think she has Down syndrome. But she is just the sweetest little soul, and I love her so much. She's so cute. And I just loved her. But I love the characters. And then he used to work as a coal miner, but he broke away from that, thankfully, because there's this huge bad family that pretty much runs the entire town and the coal line. And so there's that part of the story as well, along with the rivalry there. But it was so good. Highly enjoyed it. Then the last historical fiction that I have that's more, just contemporary, not too much romance. And this one I would say could also be put in the mystery section a little bit, but it's something more Gothic feeling. And this is The Lost Melody by Joanna Davidson Politano. My first book I ever read by her, and still my ultimate favorite. I'm so happy that I read this one first. So this one is about a woman who, her father passes away, and she finds out that he's been putting money into an asylum and for somebody to stay there. And she's like, who's staying there? Like, I have no memories of this person. So she decides to try to get a job at the asylum. Well, that does not go as planned, and she finds herself committed into the asylum. And it's just very good. It's very haunting, very beautiful. There's a lot of musical notes to the story. Get the pun. But I just love this one, and it still remains one of my favorites. And yes, highly recommend. It's so good. Now I'm going to go into historical romances / historical rom-coms. Sorry for the long video, but we got to mention all all the fun books. So I lied. I think this is probably my most loved genre. Historical rom-coms / historical romances. Yeah, there's a lot here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to kind of bunch these up in rom-coms and romances, but I'll let you know which one's like which. This is more of a historical rom-com. A little bit, not too much though. This is To Catch a Coronet by Grace Hitchcock. This got me into loving this author from the very beginning. So really love this book. This is the first book in a novel of best laid plans. I think the second one probably comes out next year. I have no idea though. But this is about Muriel. And she's a country baker turned heiress. And so she is kind of baking and cooking in the kitchen. And then this kind of man who's kind of, I think he's like all dusty and everything. He comes in with like a box and stuff, and she thinks he's a delivery man. Well, she's tasked to find a husband because in the beginning of the book, she actually proposed to somebody, and this is like, late 1800s, and the guy's embarrassed, she's embarrassed, so they pretty much task her to go into this countryside and to find a husband. So she kind of has a little bit of attraction with this delivery man, but she says, well, I'm an heiress, I really can't see this man. But it's just so good, and there's a little bit of piracy going on in this, which I love a good pirate story, you know me. So I really highly enjoyed it. I can't wait for the next book in this series. Hopefully it'll come out soon, I hope. The next one is actually the second book in a series, because the first book I only gave 3 stars to. So that is Saved by the Matchmaker. This is book 2 in the A Shanahan Match by Jody Hedlund. But I loved book 2. These characters in here, we have Sullivan and Anya, and I just love them both, their characters, how they got together. I'm not going to spoil anything because it is book 2, but just know it's the sister from the first book. I won't say who the guy is, but it's just really, really good, and I love the romance. It's so sweet and very, very swoon worthy. Not rom-com, this is definitely historical romance, but love these 2 characters. And Sullivan is another tortured soul. Can you tell I love tortured souls? Very much so. I actually have a couple more of them coming up. But I really love this book a lot. Very, very swoon-worthy. So the next book I have is from Karen Whitmire. This is Head in the Clouds. And I read this one because I knew a couple of my friends really enjoyed this one, and it did not disappoint. This is, I don't think it's a rom-com. I think it's just historical romance. But we're following a girl named Adelaide, and she falls in love with a man who you can tell right off the bat he is so sleazy, and he's definitely got something to hide. Well, she ends up deciding to follow him to prove her love for him, and come to find out some things about him. And she's stuck though. She has no job. She's there. And so she ends up finding a job as a governess for this guy somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And she ends up taking the job. And I really just loved her character. I loved the man. I believe it's his niece, I think. Or, oh no, it's just a girl that he's taking care of. But really loved this book and loved the romance in here. And there's a little bit of, I think there is a little bit of like old Western adventure type story, but really enjoyed this one. This is probably one of my favorites of Karen Whitmire's. Next is Meeting Her Match by Jen Turano, although the entire series, The Matchmakers, is really, really great. And this one's definitely a historical rom-com series. Very funny, especially the 3rd book. I just really, really love this series, but it's all about matchmakers getting matched, getting back into society, all the I would say there's a lot of banter throughout the books and stuff, and it's just such a good time. Books 2 and 3 I think are definitely my favorites in this series, but highly recommend the entire series, and definitely I want to pick up more of Jen Turano's books. So the next ones I have are all historical romances, no rom-com. The next one is Beyond Ivy Walls by Rachel Fordham. This is a historical fiction about a woman who she needs to help her family and support them. So she takes a job in this factory, and she ends up moving into like this barn because she's kicked out of her apartment, or like an old abandoned factory behind this manor house. Well, the owner of the manor comes back after being estranged from his family and after they pass away. And he's like, I can't have you living in my factory. And it's just the sweetest romance. We have another tortured soul hero, which I love. He had a lot of things happen in his past as a child, which is so sad. But I just loved his character. I loved his love for music. And I have told a lot of people, if you love any of these stories, Rigoletto Beauty and the Beast or Phantom of the Opera, you will love this story. So really, really love this one. Next is, I would say, this could also go into the fantasy category, but we're going to put it in historical fiction. And that is the Timeless series by Gabrielle Meyer. I love this series. It's probably one of my top favorite series of all time. But this is about a series of time traveler women, and they inherit their time travel ability each generation. And so we're following different characters throughout the books as they live two separate timelines. And so they can live in one timeline, but then they fall asleep, and then they wake up in the other timeline as if no time has passed in between each timeline. And so they pretty much live like double the lifespan. But it's fascinating, and each character has to decide at a certain age if they're gonna pick which timeline to live. And of course, it might not work out for them because God is always in control of their lives. And so really highly recommend these. They're all really great. And the next one comes out very, very soon. So I'm very excited. And then the last couple that I have, I almost dropped them, are all Paperbacks, because obviously she's one of my favorites. So the first one is her, I forgot the title of the series because it's such a long title in the series. I believe it's My Heart Belongs in the Blue Ridge. I believe. Yes, I don't even have to look it up because I remembered. So My Heart Belongs in the Blue Ridge series. And I love this series so much. I just got the third book in. Yay. So Laurel's Dream is the first book. That was actually the first book I ever read of Paperbacks. So happy that it was. I think it was a great first choice. And then we had The Heart of the Mountains and Hope Like Wildflowers, which is her newest release from this month, actually. And they're all amazing. I love these. The characters, such great swoony romances too as well, but also filled with a lot of heart and soul into each of the characters' lives. And I just really, really loved each one. I think they're phenomenal. You really need to check any of her books out. But I honestly think her historical fiction is probably my favorites. If I had to pick between like contemporary and historical, I really love her historical. So very, very good. I love all these books, and I'm happy that I got to read this book like months and months in advance. It was so good. This is honestly also probably her favorite too, or at least close to her heart, because this is actually based on a true story. So I'm really excited about that. And then the last series I have by her, which I do have book 3. Actually, I can hold it up because it's over here. I just haven't read it yet. But it is the Frederick and Grace mystery series, and I have loved honestly, a lot of people's favorites are book 1, but I think book 2 is my favorite. I really loved it. But if you're looking for adventure and action and romance and a married main couple, because that's very rare that it happens and we have a married couple throughout a series. So I love that. And I loved all these books so much. And I'm working on Juliet Code right now. So if you like action adventure throughout historical time period with mysteries and romance and a very adventurous I'm not sure what I was gonna say, but a very adventurous main character that's it's very, I would say, hyper, kind of, because she is hyper, I feel like, compared to her husband anyways. But I just love this series. I decided to put Christmas on this list as well because why not? It's heading toward Christmas. I'm gonna have a whole video though on all my like favorite Christmas books or Christmas books I recommend. But I thought I'd put my favorite. I feel like this is my favorite. So along with when I showed you Better Watch Out by Natalie Walters, that's also at the top. But A Quilt for Christmas by Melody Carlson. I love this one. It's very, very light on the romance. We're just following a girl who her mother's in the hospital, and she tasks some strange lady in another apartment in the building to help make her a quilt. And the lady's like, I don't even know you, and I'm old. I can't make a quilt all by myself before Christmas. So she's tasked to find people to help out. And it's just such the sweetest story. I think it's my favorite Melody Carlson book to date. I love this one so much. It's so sweet. Now we're going into the sci-fi fantasy realm of things. I think I'm going to do fairy tale retellings first, because I have a couple that are historical as well. They're actually over here. I forgot to put them over here. So I have 2 that are just historical fiction retellings. And the first one is The Maid of Bally McCool by Jennifer Dybel. I was actually going to put these two in the historical romances, but then I realized, no, they're fairy tale retellings. So this one's just a historical retelling on Cinderella. So we're following a woman who is kind of adopted a little bit by the lady who runs this like girls' school, and but she's pretty much treated like a slave, and she ends up running into a man named Michael, and they end up having a little bit of a romance, and it's very sweet, and I love it. And it's set in Ireland, which I also love, so it's a great time all around. And the other one that's historical fiction is If the Boot Fits by Karen Whitmire. This is actually the second book in this series, but it's my favorite. This is another Cinderella retelling, actually. And it's about a girl who, she is like the princess of the story. But her father is like this big Texas rancher, and so she's like at this fancy party and stuff. Well, some guy breaks into the house, and for some reason, and he ends up running away, climbing out the window and running, and he ends up leaving a boot along the way. And it's a little bit of rom-com too, because I loved the ways that she was trying to find out who fit the boot. It was just hilarious. So really loved that part. I loved his family and his story, and I just love that. I love that it was like, a gender swap roles where Cinderella was Cinderfella and the prince was a princess, and it was just a really sweet romance. Love that one too. I think the only other one I have for like a historical romance retelling is The Peasant's Dream by Melanie Dickerson. But I will also say literally every single Melanie Dickerson book is amazing, and highly recommend all of them. I think they're all fantastic and all great. But that one is another Cinderella retelling. Can you tell there's a pattern here? But I just love that one too. All the books in that series. It's I believe I can't remember the title of the series. I forgot right now. But I love them all so much. And as I said, all of Melanie Dickerson's books are great if you love fairy tale retellings, but just historical time period retellings. There's no fairy tale magic or anything. None of those books did. Okay, now I'm going to go into, I think there's one set of books that are, actually there's two, that are more definitely fantasy fairy tale retellings. So the first one is The Mermaid's Tale by Ellie Richmond. The second book actually comes out very, very soon. But this is a Little Mermaid retelling / I would say sequel to Little Mermaid. So in this one we're following a mermaid who she learns about like the Little Mermaid curse. And so she is actually born without a tail, but technically she's still a mermaid. But like they're pretty much like bottom of the barrel. They're not supposed to have legs at all. So she like really is hoping for a tail. And then her niece is born with legs, and she's like, oh no, like I gotta help her somehow. So she's on a journey to try to help her get a tail. And I just really loved it. It's really unique story retelling, I think, but also still has like that familiarity of Little Mermaid. Really good. I think my copies are like way back in my shelves, but I'm going to mention Dust and Shadow by Kara Swanson. This is a Peter Pan retelling duology, and it was just a good time. It's a little bit darker, I would say, like geared more towards like the original retelling of Peter Pan, or story of Peter Pan, I feel like, than Disney. But I still really enjoyed it. It's not super dark because it's still Christian fiction. It's still clean, but it's very good. I really enjoyed the duology. Definitely would want to try to reread it as well, but highly recommend those too. Now I'm going to go into fantasy and sci-fi, and I don't have a lot of fantasy recommendations, only because I haven't read a lot recently, and most are like, fairy tale retellings, whatever. But I do have Wish Dress by Nadine Bredes, which is my favorite. And next year I do plan on reading a lot more fantasy and sci-fi, because I'm definitely more into reading those genres right now. But I love Wish Dress. It's another one that I've tabbed up a lot because it was a buddy read. But highly recommend this book. It's honestly, I don't think it's a retelling of anything. It's just a fantasy book about, it's also kind of like a fairy tale feel, but it's about a woman who she grants wishes with her tears. So whenever a tear falls, somebody can be granted a wish. Well, she is cursed to where the next tear that drops will kill her. And so it's so good. And there was tons of Christian analogies in here and symbolism, but if you aren't looking for that, you won't really notice it at all. But it was just so good. I really, really enjoyed it, and yeah, it's so good, so good. So try it out. It's so good. And as far as sci-fi goes, this is my favorite. And as I said, I am planning on reading a lot more, but the Jocelyn Saga, which I still have not finished yet. I've only finished book 1, but I can't highly recommend this enough. It was so great. As I said, the audiobook narrator is like the best I've ever heard. So if you love a really good narrator in audiobooks, you need to pick up the Jocelyn Saga by Ronnie Kendig. It was so good. And I need to pick up the rest of the series like in January because I want to know what happens. So I'm just gonna like binge read the rest or listen to the rest of the series. But it's so good. It's about a woman who is like, her whole planet is pretty much like wiped out, and she's like sent somewhere or finds herself in another planet and stuff, and they pretty much tell her that she did it, and she's like, I did not do it. And so she's trying to figure out, who killed her family. She's accused of the murders. What's going on? And then we're following Marco, who's trying to figure out also what's going on. And they both also have like a similar mark. I don't know if they were born with it or not, but it is a, I guess, gift, of course, from God. And so it tells a prophecy of some sorts in the sci-fi world. But really enjoyed it. It's so good. And I can't wait to finish the rest of the series, which I should get cracking on. And I want to mention one more sci-fi book. It's the first in, I don't know if it's a duology or more, but it's called Suspended in the Stars by, it's either E.A. Hendricks or A.E. Hendricks, I can't remember. But I read this one just recently and I loved it. It's about a woman who was hiding on a ship, and she finds another man who just happens to be on the ship when they're performing because she is a trapeze artist in, the spaceship. And he's either trying to find something or he's hiding away, and she's like, I don't know why I'm helping this man. He's a complete stranger. But it's such a great ride. Very, very, it's a light sci-fi. Like, you don't really, need a degree to, because it's not a heavy sci-fi. It's a light sci-fi with some romance in it. But the second book's coming out next month, so I'm very excited to read that one. All right, so those are all of the books I have to share with you. There was a lot, and I'm going to have time to put all these away and go shopping with my mom. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. Let me know which ones were your favorites, if you've read any, or when I described them, let me know which one caught your eye the most. I'd love to know and chat with you down in the comments. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all in the next video.